Polar bear versus Utah raptor. Who would win between these two titans? The polar bear is generally known as the largest terrestrial carnivore on this planet, but could a similar sized prehistoric carnivore be able to beat this animal? Well, let the analysis begin. Size and description. Polar bears are robust and stocky, with well-evolved adaptations to survive in the Arctic. Polar bears are the largest bear species, and they are the Arctic's top predator. They have always been a powerful symbol of the strength and endurance of the Arctic. The scientific name of the polar bear is Ursus maritimus, which translates to mean sea bear. The polar bear has become our most iconic symbol of climate change. They live in the Arctic Circle and hunt pinnipeds, muskoxes, and reindeer, and scavenge carcasses of whales. Polar bears generally vary a lot in their size, depending on the Pacific population, but generally, the larger populations of mature male polar bears average about 1,300 pounds, 590 kilograms. Polar bears range in length from 8 to 10 feet, 2.4 to 3 meters, from the head to the end of its tiny tail, and they can reach heights of 4.5 to 5.3 feet, 1.4 to 1.6 meters tall at the shoulder when they are on 4 legs, but they can reach heights of 10 feet when they stand on their hind legs. On the other hand, Utah raptors and raptors in general are some of the most famous and popular dinosaurs. Generally, the Utah raptor has a completely different physique. It had a much bulkier build than other raptors. Utah raptors, the largest dromaeosaurids, have been estimated to weigh about 1,100 pounds, 500 kilograms, reach lengths of 16 to 23 feet, 5 to 7 meters from head to tail, and stand about 6 feet, 1.8 meters tall at the head. So, the polar bear would have the upper hand in mass, but the Utah raptor would have the edge in length as well as height, if the polar bear is on 4 legs, but if the polar bear is standing upright, then it takes the edge in height. So when it comes down to which carnivore has a size advantage, I would have to give the polar bear an extra point. Speed and agility. The polar bear having such a bulky body can come with some downfalls, which is that it hinders the bear's speed and agility, but they are still quite agile for a creature of its size. They can also run at top speeds of 25 to 35 miles per hour. On the other hand, Utah raptors were likely not very agile or nimble compared to other raptor relatives, as they were generally built a bit more for power rather than dexterity. Utah raptors were estimated to run up to 25 miles per hour. This is slightly slower than the polar bear's top speed, but it makes sense, as animals that are mostly quadrupedal are generally able to run much faster than bipedal creatures. However, when it simply comes to the dexterity and agility of these animals, not just top speed, this is where the Utah raptor has an advantage. The Utah raptor was generally built more slender and streamlined than the polar bear. It also had a very flexible tail, which would increase the Utah raptor's mobility. The Utah raptor also had a lighter skeleton, which would generally enable it to maneuver around easier. But however, a lighter skeleton would have caused attrition and other factors, such as durability. But in the topic of dexterity, I'll have to give the Utah raptor about 2 extra points. Defense. Bears like the polar bear have an extremely good natural defense against all types of attacks. This is due to the very thick, dense fur, which protects the bear from any possible injuries from the long claws of other members of its own species. In addition to this, below the fur they have quite a thick layer of fat, which is what protects the muscles. This is the main reason of ursids having very tanky builds. The polar bear's fat can be as thick as 4.5 inches, 11 centimeters. No other ursid has hide this thick and protective. A bear's physique is also very good at shock absorbing the blunt force produced from the hits of other animals. To get an idea of how much force can be absorbed by this type of physique, if we look at the presented video, we can literally see a grizzly bear, which is much smaller and has smaller height than a polar bear, basically just absorb the force of these gunshots like it was literally just a scratch. Now this is really impressive. As for the Utah Raptors were covered in feathers like birds, but generally feathers don't offer that good of protection. Generally, the feathers were speculated to have been used for heat insulation and attracting mates. Generally, the Utah Raptor has a much more streamlined build compared to the much more robust and compact build of the polar bear. Generally, a huge disadvantage for the Utah Raptor is its bone structure. The Utah Raptor had semi-hollow bones, very similar to that of birds, but the polar bear has solid mammal bones. The hollow bones of the Utah Raptor is more resistant to torsion, but definitely not compression. This is basically the opposite to solid mammal bones, which are highly resistant to compression, but not torsion. Having much less compression in the bones makes the Utah Raptor quite susceptible to blunt force attacks. So the bone structure of the polar bear would be much more dense and resistant, while the semi-hollow bones of the Utah Raptor are lighter and much more prone to fractures and damage. So there's not really much more to say. Generally, the polar bear along with its weight advantage has a clear advantage in defense. So the polar bear gets about 3.5 more points. Bite effectiveness. A polar bear's powerful jaws are able to exert a pressure of 2,000 pounds per square inch, depending on the size of the bear. This is one of the strongest bites of all mammals. Polar bears have 42 teeth, and they have developed blade-like incisors to shear off pieces of flesh from their prey. With strong canines to grasp prey and tear through tough hides. Since they swallow most of their food in large chunks, rather than chewing it first, strong molars are not necessary, unlike brown bears. So they have evolved thinner and weaker molars that are much better designed for a carnivorous way of life, as they don't need to chew their food much, compared to their omnivorous brown cousins. Also, having thinner molars also helps to cut meat better. The polar bear's canines are quite long and sharp, compared to other bear species, as they are only designed to kill prey. The canines are about 2 to 3 inches, 5 to 8 centimeters long. On the other hand, Utah Raptors had very large jaws, which were about 24 inches, 61 centimeters in length, which is a bit bigger than the polar bear's 22-inch, 52 centimeter long skull. Therefore, the Utah Raptor can reach its opponent with its jaws to deliver a potential bite, easier than vice versa. Although there has not been any concrete studies about the bite force of the Utah Raptor due to the remains being relatively incomplete, based on the fact that the Utah Raptor's skull was a bit larger and a bit more robust on average, I think it is fair to say that the Utah Raptor may have had a stronger bite force. But having a stronger bite force doesn't always mean your bite is superior. We have to also take into account the teeth as well. The Utah Raptor's skull was filled with blade-like teeth, which were well designed for ripping through skin and flesh. You may think that biting down with more sharp teeth is more of an advantage, but it's actually the other way around. A polar bear would normally sink its 4 sharp canines in its prey, while the Utah Raptor would likely sink nearly all of its teeth. This gives the polar bear an advantage, as the polar bear will be able to concentrate more force in a smaller surface area, giving it more piercing power, and having canines allows for more precision. So the polar bear would probably be able to produce more pressure when biting down, so the polar bear may have the upper hand in bite effectiveness, Therefore, I'm going to give an extra point to the polar bear. Weapons. Utah raptors had sickle-like claws that could grow up to 9.5 inches. Generally, their arms are relatively short, which highlights that they likely use their arm claws to hold on to struggling prey. This allowed them to eventually rely on the jaws to deliver the killing blow. However, the toe claws were used in a similar manner, but very interestingly, it had a deadly toe claw that was raised off the ground in order to keep sharp. Once it grabbed its prey, the Utah raptor most likely stabbed its deadly toe claw in its prey's body in order to get a steady grip, while it then relied on the jaws for the finishing blow. Some scientists believe Utah raptors may have hunted in a similar manner to some birds of prey. This means that it may have jumped on the body of its prey, then tried to nail it to the ground with its own mass. Then it would lock its claws into its prey's flesh to keep a steady grip. Then finally it would use its jaws to deliver the killing blow. There is also some theories that the Utah raptor may have kicked to sink the claws even deeper into its prey. On the other hand, polar bears have very massive paws, which can definitely cause a serious amount of damage. Their paws can measure more than 16 inches long and 12 inches wide. The large paws also help to distribute their massive size on ice and snow to walk efficiently. They also have strong, razor-sharp claws that are about 3.5 inches, 9 centimeters long. These claws are much more curved and sharper than their brown bear relatives. The claws are really good at tearing through the flesh of seals. They also help to secure their prey in their paws, as seals can easily slip away. The claws are also very crucial for providing traction on slick ice to prevent slipping. Both of these animals are definitely heavily armed to kill, but I think the Utah raptor has the upper hand due to its larger claws. So, I will have to give about 1.5 more points to the Utah raptor. Fighting knowledge. It was very hard to get an idea of the fighting knowledge of the Utah raptor, but judging by its lifestyle, it was probably a highly territorial animal and could have been very aggressive to other members of its own species. But there is not much evidence of highly aggressive and vicious territorial behavior, unlike the remains and evidence shown on other dinosaurs, like Carcharodontosaurus. The Utah raptor also faced off against massive iguanodons. It is still unknown whether the Utah raptor was a pack hunter or a solitary hunter, but our current understanding shows that it was mainly solitary. On the other hand, polar bears may aggressively fight other members of their own species over mating rights and territorial disputes, and especially when there is a chance to scavenge when a seal is killed. But they also face off against very dangerous opponents, such as walruses, muskoxes, and the occasional wolf pack. So the polar bear has a good amount of experience. But I'm not 100% sure of what other animals the Utah raptor could have faced off against. But since they had experience fighting against iguanodons, I'm going to consider them both equal in fighting knowledge. Now let's see. Who will win the fight? The polar bear or the Utah raptor? The polar bear brings with him a weight advantage with a more robust constitution. Being a mammal, it will most likely have a cognitive advantage to process information faster and more effectively in the battle. It will also have the initial reach advantage, stability advantage, as well as being able to produce more pressure with its bite, giving it the edge in bite effectiveness. And the polar bear has the obvious defensive advantage. On the other hand, the Utah raptor takes the edge in dexterity thanks to its lankier build and lighter skeleton, as well as weaponry, due to its large sickle-shaped claws. However, both these animals are found to be equal in fighting knowledge. It is generally not too easy to predict the outcome of such a duel between these two animals. For the verdict, both animals will be bloodlusted and equally motivated to kill one another. The winner will likely come out very injured, but overall, I would have to say the mighty polar bear has more chances of winning this battle. The polar bear, having a size advantage, along with its grappling and mauling abilities, will make it easier for the polar bear to pin the Utah Raptor down and deal serious damage. In addition to this, its superb shock-absorbing build can likely absorb the initial hits from the Utah Raptor's jaws. The polar bear, having solid mammal bones compared to the semi-hollow bones of the Utah Raptor, would be a huge advantage, as the polar bear can cause fractures to the more slender build of the Utah Raptor, much easier than vice versa. This will also be thanks to its very powerful and massive paws, which can cause serious amounts of blunt force to the susceptible skeleton of the Utah Raptor, and when it swipes, at the same time, its claws will cause serious amounts of piercing damage. Also, thanks to the initial reach advantage of the polar bear, it will also be able to strike first. Being a mammal, the polar bear will most likely have better thinking capabilities. This means that the polar bear will be the first to adapt to the situation and identify the weak points of its opponent much quicker and more effectively in the fight. Another great advantage is that, thanks to being a mammal, it should have better stamina thanks to its more efficient respiratory system, which makes it more likely to win a long battle. But generally, the main advantage I see for the polar bear is that it just has a more powerful build and robust constitution, and when the polar bear lands such a blow with its paw, it will be harder for the Utah Raptor to keep balance, then vice versa, again due to the stability advantage of the polar bear. As I said, this battle will be very interesting, but since the Utah Raptor will have to get close to the polar bear in order to use its weapons effectively, this will make the Utah Raptor quite exposed to getting hit by the polar bear's deadly paws, thanks to the reach advantage of the polar bear. And when the Utah Raptor gets close enough, it will be hard again for the Utah Raptor to deal serious damage, as when it reaches this position, the polar bear will have the height advantage by standing on its hind legs. Then from here, by using its front limbs, it can easily start using its superior grappling skills and begin mauling and grappling the Utah Raptor and win the battle. So that's my verdict. So, who do you think would win the battle? A polar bear or a Utah Raptor? Write your opinions in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to show your support if you haven't already. Thank you, and see you next time.